We already did that. Still grateful, though. Still think it was amazing. Still praying that God uses what we did this weekend to fuel work in his kingdom. But tonight, we are going to talk about the character of the flood. Now, you know how sometimes Dad will make fun of me and my titles and say, I don't know where he's ever going. Well, tonight he jumped the gun. I was intentionally elusive with this weird title, and he said, we're going to be talking about the character of God. So, okay, well, that's where we're going to end up going. But let's start by looking at this account of Noah's Ark. In Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8, you have the story of Noah's Ark. And one of the things you notice right off the bat is it's not very long. Like, this is one of the most retold stories of all time ever. Like, you hear people reference the flood and Noah's Ark all over the place. I think we have little children's decorations in every church building in all of America that have little animals and a happy Noah and a rainbow and a boat. And like, this is retold in a bunch of different ways all over the place. And so this is a really well-known account. One thing I've noticed in talking with people about it is sometimes we don't know exactly when it happened. Did Abraham come first, or was it Noah? Was Noah before or after the Exodus? And that's really important because Noah is the story of Noah's Ark is one of the first major stories in the Bible. I mean, it goes creation, the fall, Cain and Abel, and Noah. Like, it comes really, really quick there at the beginning of the Bible. It's right at the beginning in Genesis chapter 6. So let's get a little bit familiar with it. We're going to read not all of it, but a lot of it. We're going to read a lot of it, get familiar with the story, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, and hopefully learn a little bit about this story of Noah's Ark. Let's start in chapter 6 and verse 5. Chapter 6 and verse 5 says, The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It's a little redundant, right? But boy, does that give you an idea of what situation the world was in. Every intention of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. Only bad all the time. All right, that might be how I would have written it. So you've got a very dire state of the world and of humans at this point. Verse 6, And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. Its length of the ark will be 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Now, here's the instruction, right? You've got, this is essentially God telling Noah what's about to happen and what he's going to do. I've decided to clean the earth off. We're going to wipe it out, right? We're going to blot out every living thing. We're starting over. And you, your family, build a boat. Make it this size. Go on and do it, because this flood is coming. And then if you skip all the way down to verse 22, it says, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. I think that's a great lesson, right? Like, you notice you don't have any account of Noah responding. A what? A flood? There's some speculation that it's possible rain had never fallen on the earth at this point, and so a flood. A what? Okay. It's also it's certainly a confusing task. You're going to build a triple-decker boat that's going to house every animal in the known world, and we're going to put them all in there together. How is that going to work, would have been probably my first response. Do you plan on me building this whole thing? That's a pretty big boat, 300 cubits. That's not small. All right, like I would have had some questions, and yet you don't ever see Noah respond. All it says is that Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Pick up in chapter 7. It says, "Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation." And then he has him take some different animals and skip down to verse 4. He says, "For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. Every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. So again, you see God coming back, re-emphasizing the command, letting Noah know, hey, you got to get this done. In 7 days, I'm coming back with a flood, right? This idea of blotting out. I like the language because I'm cleaning this up. Did y'all ever use whiteout when you made a mistake on a paper or something? I mean, I haven't used it in forever, but the smell is deeply ingrained into my memories. You dip it in there and you just white it out, just blot it right out. And there's a little, liquid paper now over the top, and I don't know, depending on how fancy your whiteout was, you could write on top of it afterwards. It was like it never happened, was kind of the idea. Well, this is a similar idea. God is going to wipe away everything on the earth, and he's going to use water to make it happen. And Noah and his family are going to be above the water in the ark. So let's skip down to verse 17 of chapter 7. Chapter 7, verse 17, "The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole earth, heaven, were covered. And the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life, died. And he blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. So, it's pretty sanitized. When you read that, you just think, Noah and his family were on a boat. Everyone else died. And that doesn't really conjure up an image for me. But when you start thinking about what actually this might have looked like, you think, death, that's not a beautiful thing. You think drowning, that's a pretty tragic thing. You think, what happens to a body, animal or human, after it drowns? Well, it fills up with gases and floats. Yeah, that's gross. You think as people are drowning, they probably were banging on the ark, scratching on the ark, trying to find a splinter to hold on to prevail against these waters. You think about I saw it was a documentary about extreme sports Courtney found, and we watched it together. And this woman was a surfer, and she was trying to ride one of these enormous waves. She got up on it, and something happened where it turned over earlier than she was expecting, and it crushed her. And I mean, they said the only reason she was still together was because of her wetsuit. And, I mean, she almost died because the waters prevailed against her, might be the way the Bible says it. I mean, just annihilated this earth. Like, this is what we're looking at. We're not looking at, a little bit of rain, and we're not looking at, and suddenly the people were gone. We're looking at what probably, I would say, almost certainly stands as the most catastrophic event in human history, right? There were no smiling animals, all right. There was no happy, peaceful boat. I mean, even though life was inside of the boat, it was surrounded by death. You imagine the sounds. You imagine the sight. You imagine the smell. This was not an event like anything that had ever happened or anything that has happened since. You might remember a couple years ago, the hurricane came and hit Houston. Do you remember Hurricane Harvey? I mean, Hurricane Katrina happened, but I don't remember it, so I'm not using it as an example. But Hurricane Harvey was a big deal, and it impacted me a little bit more because that's where Courtney's family is from. And so when all the storms came in, I mean, I remember seeing a picture of Houston, and the water was like halfway up some of these buildings. It was unbelievable. The overpass was an underpass at that point. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was crazy. My mother-in-law's car flooded from the top and the bottom. That's how wild that storm was, and it paled in comparison to the flood that happened in Genesis chapter 6. God said he was going to wipe out the earth, and he did. He cleansed the earth with water, and only Noah and his family and the animals that were on the ark survived with him. You think about what it was like when Noah was building this ark. He didn't do it in a day, you know. He probably didn't do it in a couple of days. He was probably the crazy guy building what is it called? A boat? A boat, right? Yeah, like that thing, that guy's, it didn't happen quickly. And so Noah, I mean, his whole identity would have been wrapped up in this at some point. As he's telling people about the impending flood, he's doing it. I mean, he must really believe what he's doing. Noah was the boat guy or the ark guy. I don't know, whatever you want to call him. And so you've got this picture that the Bible gives us that is much more gruesome. It's much more difficult to handle than the pictures we have on our children's nurseries, right? Now that we've talked about this, every time you go in a nursery, you're going to be like, that wasn't what it looked like. Anyway, you got this picture that the Bible paints, and it is a tragic event loaded with death, loaded with, I mean, you can almost feel the tragedy in the pages of Scripture as you read through it. And this is the story of Noah's Ark. That's it. We only read a couple pieces because, y'all don't want to listen to me read 3 chapters in a row. That would be tough. But this is the story of Noah's Ark. God commissioned him. Noah built the ark. God said the flood was coming. The flood came, wiped out everyone on the face of the earth in a tragic way, and Noah and his family survived. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and the waters were on the earth for 150 days. Later on, Noah will release some doves and some ravens. He'll see if they bring back evidence that they are able to find a home to live. And when one of the birds doesn't come back, he decides, well, we must be good to go back out and go back into the earth. That's it. That's Noah's Ark. Or is it Noah's Ark? Is this actually a story about Noah and his ark? I mean, that's what we always call it, right? Well, did you notice that Noah doesn't say a whole lot? Like at any point? In fact, in the entire story of Noah's Ark, I'm not sure through chapter 7, he doesn't say a word. All right? Through chapter 8, I'm pretty sure he doesn't really say much. And then it doesn't happen until chapter 9 that Noah even talks, and that's a whole other story that we don't ever read, right? Like this is an interesting thing to call Noah's Ark, because Noah doesn't say much. He's not even really that important of a character. In fact, all we're told about Noah is back in chapter 6 and verse 9. He gets one whole verse that he was blameless in his generation, and he walked with God, and he had a family, all right? That's what we know about Noah. We don't know what he was like. We don't know if he was funny. We don't know if he was wise. We don't know if he was clever. We don't know if he was a particularly hard worker or if this was just, when God says build a boat, you build a boat. I would never do this on my own time, but God said, like we don't know anything about this guy. Is this really Noah's Ark? Is this really the story of Noah's Ark? It makes you ask, why did Moses write this story? Traditionally, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, which would mean he wrote Genesis. So if Moses wrote the book of Genesis, as he's sitting down and he's writing, why did he include the story of Noah's Ark, right? Why did he have that in here? What was he trying to do for us? Well, you might have a couple answers, right? Your first answer might be, well, because it happened. Why did he write about Noah's Ark? Because it happened. Okay, well, sure. But if the point of the Bible was to write about major events in world history, the Bible didn't do a great job. I mean, it did a great job with the events that it covered, but it didn't do a great job covering all of the events in human history. The Bible seems to be concerned with certain world events and not others. So, yeah, Maybe Moses wrote about Noah's Ark because the flood happened, and I just wanted people to know that. The truth of the matter is, people knew that. It's written about as if it was a known fact. He doesn't take time convincing you that the flood happened or giving you evidence. He just said, so this is how it happened, because it was understood that that was what happened. So why did he have to put it in here if everyone already knew that the flood had happened? You might say, because we need to learn the lessons from Noah, right? I think that's fair, right? That's true. We need to learn the lessons from Noah. God said it, I did it. That settles it, right? Like, that's a great lesson you can learn from Noah. But what about in Genesis chapter 12 when Abraham teaches us that exact same lesson? He could have saved some scroll. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't have to add Noah in here to give us the lesson of God said it, I did it, and that settles it. In chapter 12, God comes to Abraham. He says, hey, get up, leave your house. Go to a land that I'll tell you about. Abraham gets up, leaves his house, and goes to a land that God tells him about. God says it, I did it, that settles it. Right? Like, so you see that lesson didn't make this a necessary story. And the truth of the matter is, if Noah is the main character of this story, then there really wasn't much of a point to recording it. Right? If this is a story about Noah, it's not that valuable of a story. But it's not a story about Noah. It's a story about God. The reason that Moses wrote this story, that he took the time to write about this story in this place, is because it teaches us about who God is. See, the real character in this story that we need to know is God. We need to learn about God's character from the story of the flood. So let's back up and look at a couple of things that will help us understand how this story is about God. We're going to back all the way up to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4, Cain kills Abel. Skip on down to verse 8. God favored Abel's sacrifice over Cain's. That made Cain mad. Verse 8, Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? And Cain said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Okay. One person died. Their blood was spilled into the ground. And that one person's blood was loud enough to get the creator of the universe's attention. His blood, Abel's blood, cried out to God. Well, just a couple pages later, we're going to read about a world that was, what does it say in chapter 6 and verse 11? Corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. If the blood of one person cries out to God and he hears it, what was God hearing in these days? What were the cries like if not just one person was having violence committed against them, but an entire world of people were screaming out because their blood was being shed? The whole world was full of violence. What did those shrieks sound like in God's ears? His creation tearing each other apart. You know my least favorite noise in my home? My least favorite noise is when my kids are fighting. It kills me, partly because I don't really know who to punish, But the other part, and the more serious part, is I hate that my kids don't get along. I love you both so much. Please love each other. God's children in these days were screaming against one another, crying out against each other, their blood being spilled, and that blood was screaming, crying out to God. And so what is he hearing? What is he observing about his creation right now? He's observing violence. It calls it corrupted, the whole earth. All of humanity was corrupted. That's not what I made. That's not what I made. Genesis 1, I made it good. And when I finished with you guys, I said it was very good. That's not very good. Y'all have messed this thing up in a big, big way. The blood had to be crying out to God in an unprecedented way with volume and shrieks that we probably cannot even imagine. So he hears the blood cry out. And then look at God's response as he realizes this. In chapter 6 and verse 5, it says that the Lord saw the wickedness of man and that it was great on the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Now, before we read that verse, what was God's posture at the flood? He was angry, right? This is an angry God that wiped out the earth because they ruined it. This was God at his most upset with humans. He was mad. I mean, that's how I always imagined it. And when I ask people, and it's a trick question, but when I ask them, how did God feel about the earth before the flood? What did he think about people when he sent the flood? Why did God send the flood? The answer almost every time without fail is he was mad at us. That's not what I'm reading. It says that the Lord regretted, so there's regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. The picture we are given of God and his reasoning behind sending the flood is not that of an angry parent upset that things aren't the way he wanted them, but that of a loving father who is watching his children destroy themselves. Instead of thinking of an angry God, think of a father whose child has left the home, forgotten everything that they were taught, allowed their life to be thrown into utter chaos, homelessness, drug use, terrible relationships, severed relationships. They're at their breaking point every day, it seems, and you're not able to help. You just watch them. That's all you see. So that's my baby. I helped them grow every day. And they're breaking their life apart. They are killing themselves. And they're killing other people around them too. That's what God looked like before he sent the flood. Devastated. Saddened. The Bible uses the words grieved to his heart. He's not mad. He's broken. It gives us a peek at who this God really is. Not an angry God waiting to punish, but a loving God devastated by the things that we do that hurt ourselves and others. This story also highlights three characteristics of God that are essential to understanding who he is. In this story, we're given a peek at God's character, and it shows us his justice, his mercy, and his grace all at the same time. In the story of the flood, we're given these three characteristics of God, that he is a God who loves justice, that he loves mercy, and he loves grace. And he wants to do all of them all the time, right? Which sounds impossible for us. But that's why we have this story here. It's a picture of who our God is. It lets us know right at the beginning of this book that when we are at our very worst, God still balances justice, mercy, and grace perfectly. Think about the story that we just read, right? If justice is giving you what you deserve, did they get what they deserved at that time in the earth? Absolutely. The thoughts of their heart were only evil always. This is the example of if we don't send them to prison, they'll do it again. Like there was no remorse. There was no learning of a lesson. There was only evil always in the intention of the heart of man. Justice had to be given, and so they were wiped out from the face of the earth. If mercy is not giving you what you deserve, did God show mercy to humans? How long did he give them to repent? I mean, how long did he hold off on the flood? We're not told exactly how long it went, but I mean, if you add up some of the lifespans back in chapter 5, you go back and you read about Lamech. All right, Lamech was a guy, he was a descendant of Cain. And as a descendant of Cain, he said, God took care of Cain for murdering somebody. Then God's going to take care of me for murdering 10 times as many people. Right? Lamech was a bad guy. So things started pretty bad back with Lamech in chapter 4. And then you start reading about how long it's been since these guys lived. And I mean, just peek in chapter 5 and read some numbers, random numbers. Jared lived 962 years. Mahalalel, which is my favorite name, lived 840 years. Canaan lived 910. So these people are living a long, long time. How long did God wait? How merciful was he to give them time to turn away? I mean, he didn't have to give them any time, right? It could have been as simple as you eat the fruit, you die immediately. You commit the sin, you die immediately. But it wasn't. Instead, God withheld his justice for a time, an amount of time that was undeserved. He withheld what was deserved and he showed mercy. If grace is defined as giving you what you do not deserve, then didn't God show grace in the flood? Didn't God show grace by allowing humans to continue living after the flood happened? He didn't have to preserve a remnant. He could have just said, these humans are more trouble than they're worth. I regret creating them, and I don't want them anymore. Have you guys ever gotten a pet that was more trouble than it was worth? I was working with a guy, and he got a dog. It was a stray, and he picked it up, and it was just a puppy. And it wasn't house trained. And he said, I had it for one night, and then I sent it back to its home. He said, I wasn't cleaning any of that up. I threw the rug away. He said, I threw my shoes away. I threw it all away. It was not worth it to keep that dog in his mind. I mean, could God have not said, I made these people. They were not going the way I wanted them to go. Scrap that. I'll stick with dogs. How about? They're pretty trainable, all right? Like God could have said any number of things. And yet, in his grace, in his graciousness, he chose to keep a family alive and allow humans to live on the earth longer and longer and longer until we're here. He allowed Noah and his family to be a remnant, a part that he rescued when he didn't have to. And he saved Noah and his family, and he showed grace to humans. By the end of the story, he says, listen, humans just do bad things. So I'm going to make a covenant with you, Noah, and I'm never going to do destruction like this again. He didn't not destroy us because we're so much better than these people. We're exactly these people. But he promised he's not going to do it again. And he showed us his grace in that way. God showed his grace, his mercy, and his justice all in this story. That's why Moses wrote it. That's why Moses took the time to write this down when he wrote the book of Genesis. Because he said, right at the beginning of this thing, I need you to know what kind of God you're dealing with. This is not an angry God up in heaven messing with humans. This is not a God in heaven who's annoyed with humans. This is not a God who's a long way off and doesn't care about what's going on earth. Those were the three most common perceptions of what gods were back in this time. He said, this is a God who is here. He is present. He is involved. This is a God who is brokenhearted when we hurt each other and when we hurt ourselves. This is a God who knows how to appropriately thread and braid justice and mercy and grace. His character is justice and mercy and grace. That's the God you're dealing with. How foundational is that for understanding the rest of the book? That's why Moses wrote this story, was so you could know who God was better. The main character of this story is very clear. It is God, so that we can know who he is and what he's all about. Now, you might say, how cool, I know God better, but he is God. What would that look like for me, right? Like he is God of all the universe, so of course what he does is going to be right. What would that look like for me? Like I'm just a human here on earth. How am I going to do that? What does that look like in real life, you might say? You listen to that story and you say, well, if I'm ever God over a universe, I'll know how to do a flood, right? Like now I know. No, what does this look like in our world? Look at John chapter 2. Look at John chapter 2. See, God didn't just tell us about himself in the beginning. He didn't just let us know who he was. He came down from heaven to earth and showed us what it looks like to be a human who lives with these same character. With this same character, these three characteristics. In John chapter 2, down in verse 13, it says that the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. And his disciples remembered what was written, zeal for your house will consume me. There's a lot that goes into this, but what you really need to understand is that this outer court of the temple was the only place that Gentiles could worship God. Certain Jews were allowed to go into the inner court of the temple. Absolutely no Gentiles were allowed to go into the inner court, only the outer court. Now, the outer court was a big place, but what had happened is, Jews had spread out, and they didn't all live in Jerusalem anymore. So when you traveled for Passover, or when you traveled to make sacrifices in the temple, you could bring with you, whatever fit in your caravan. That was expensive, and it was more difficult. Also had you more prone to robbery. Instead, what you could do is you could just wait till you got there and then buy your sacrifices. Well, some people got pretty clever. Saw a business opportunity. They said, I'll just have a bunch of pigeons in the temple and I'll sell them to people at a slightly marked up price for the convenience, of course. And Jesus walks in and he sees that the only area that Gentiles are allowed to worship God is no longer an area where you can worship God. It's full of money changers? What's that about? Well, if you didn't have the right kind of money, you couldn't buy the sacrifices. So if you were a Gentile, you were getting nickel and dimed every which way. You had to go into the outer court, which was now just basically a market. And then you had to take your Gentile money and exchange it for Jewish money, which there's a fee. Then you had to take your Jewish money and exchange it for the right kind of sacrifice, which was marked up. Then you could go worship. Now, we talked about in class this morning that the priests were like the go-between, right? You had to go through the priests to get to God. That's not what we meant, all right? These are called roadblocks, not go-betweens. That's not a mediator, it's a roadblock. You've got these hindrances. Imagine being a poor Gentile. I can't afford the exchange rate. I can't afford to buy a sacrifice. Well, then you can't afford to worship God. So sorry. Jesus walks into this place and he says, that's not right. That's nowhere close to right. Get out of here. In other accounts, he says, you've turned my father's house into a den of thieves. And he drives them out. Now, I don't think he whipped people, all right, before your imagination runs wild. I think he was whipping the oxen. I think he started a stampede. Get out of here. Turning over the tables. You are ruining people's ability to worship God. That's not what he wants. You are taking advantage of people in God's name. That might be a little more close to home for us today. Jesus had a strong sense of justice. And when he saw something wrong, he did not hesitate to call it out and correct it. Look at John chapter 8. John chapter 8, we heard about this story just a couple weeks ago. The woman caught in the very act of adultery. In John chapter 8 and verse 1, it says, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning. He came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law of Moses commands us to stone such a woman. What do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. But Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote in the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more. Man, how merciful an interaction. I mean, again, if justice is giving you what you deserve, the money changers in the temple deserved a beatdown, all right? Verbally or otherwise. If mercy is God not giving you what you do deserve, then this is that, without doubt. I mean, according to the law, this woman did deserve to be punished. And, I mean, morally, she was probably, deserving of punishment in that regard as well. Socially, I meant, not morally. But Jesus takes the time, stops everyone in their tracks and says, hold on. Don't you know God is a God of mercy? He's going to give other chances. It's not one and done with God. He's going to give you more opportunities to get it right. He's not always going to give you what you deserve when you deserve punishment. Look at John chapter 21. John chapter 21. When Jesus was arrested, he told Peter, he turned to him and he said, hey, just so you know, you're going to deny me 3 times before the morning rooster crows. 3 times tonight, you're going to deny that you even know me. You're going to betray me in a way that is betraying? I don't know. You're going to stab me in the back. You're going to pretend you didn't know me. You're going to, with cursing, you're going to tell people that you had nothing to do with me. And you followed me for 3 years. You've seen things other people have never seen. And you're going to betray me. Peter, of course, says, that's ridiculous. Just like we all would say, right? That's ridiculous. I would never. What could possibly bring me to the point of saying I never knew you? Right? Well, as the night goes on, Jesus is arrested. He's rushed through a sham trial. And when all hope is at its darkest, Peter gets out of there. A couple of people come up to him and they say, Peter, weren't you with that guy? You were, yeah, I've seen you with Jesus before. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. A little bit later, they say, listen, you sound like you're from the place he's from. You talk like him, right? You followed Jesus. He says, I don't even know the guy. Leave me alone. And then as they press him, it says, with cursing, Peter exclaimed, I do not even know this man. 3 times. After that 3rd time, whatever it sounded like, had to be a devastating sound for Peter. It's amazing how different things in different contexts can sound great and awful. An alarm when your cookies are done, that's a good sound. An alarm at 6 a.m. when you have to go help somebody move, not as exciting. That rooster had to sound awful to Peter because in that moment, right there, he knew I did exactly what he told me I was going to do. I failed exactly how he said I was going to fail. I have betrayed him in the way that you couldn't imagine the level of betrayal. John chapter 21, you skip to the end. Verse 15, when they had finished breakfast, this is after Jesus died and he was raised from the dead, and he's interacting with his disciples. It says in verse 15, when he had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And Peter said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. Then he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Simon said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, then tend my sheep. And he said to him a 3rd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, do you love me? And Peter said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Now, did Jesus have to go pick Peter up after his resurrection? Was he not fully within his right to say, Peter, you do not deserve another chance? You had 3 of them. 3 of them. You had 3 chances to just say you knew me. I mean, they may not even have messed with you. You don't even know what was going to happen. What if I was going to do a miracle, Peter? No, I can't handle. I can't have someone following me who is going to be that flaky. All right? You don't deserve another shot at this. But instead, Jesus was gracious. He gave Peter something he didn't deserve, which was another chance. He gave him an opportunity to affirm his love for Christ 3 times, the same number of times that he denied Christ. We know what Peter did after this. Boy, did he use that chance. Peter goes on at the day of Pentecost to preach the first gospel sermon, the sermon about Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and what that meant for the people there. Peter goes on to establish the church in Jerusalem, to be one of the leading apostles in that area. Peter goes on to write letters to churches, his words still in our Bible today. Jesus gave Peter another chance when he didn't deserve it. If grace is giving someone what they don't deserve, then Jesus was gracious in this instance. See, here's the deal. The God of the Old Testament is Jesus of the New Testament. They're the same character. They have the same character flaws, which are none, all right? They have the same character traits, which are the perfect balance of grace and mercy and justice. They have the same desire, which is for humans to live and thrive and not kill each other and kill themselves. They have the same disposition towards humans, which is one of love and compassion. The God of the Old Testament, the character of God that we see revealed in the Old Testament, is embodied in Jesus. How would God act if he was a human? The answer, exactly the way Jesus acts in the pages of the New Testament. So 2 things I want to take away from this. First thing I think is really important, and if this is the whole lesson, I think it's worthwhile. This is who our God is. Aren't you glad? Amen. He's not an angry, evil God up in heaven who's just smiting us whenever we give him a chance. He's not watching us, waiting for us to trip up, but he is a loving God who is grieved by our mistakes, who is giving us mercy upon mercy, grace upon grace, but also punishing things that need to be punished. That's who our God is, the perfect blend of justice and mercy and grace. And aren't you glad that that's the God we serve? We don't serve some temperamental Zeus who throws lightning bolts whenever he feels like it. We serve a perfect God who cares about us and blends justice, mercy, and grace perfectly. Secondly, the challenge is to be like him. If we're Christians and we wear the name of Christ, right? If we take the name of Christ, if we take his name and we call ourselves Christians, then the challenge is to act like him, to do what he did, to be gracious, to be merciful, and to be just. Now here's the truth is each and every one of us are going to struggle with a different one of those 3. Some of us have an extremely strong sense of justice. And you know what it comes out as? Judgmental, right? Some of us have an extremely merciful heart, and you know what it comes out as? Indifferent. We don't care. Some of us are incredibly gracious, and we let a lot of things go. Jesus did all 3 of those in perfect balance. The challenge to us as his followers is to do what he would have done, to act how he acted, to exhibit the characteristics of Jesus, which are the characteristics of the God that we serve, to be just, to be merciful, and to be gracious with wisdom at the right time and in the right ways. That's our challenge. And every one of us is out of balance in some way because we are imperfect humans. And so our challenge from the scripture is to be like Jesus. Isn't that the challenge every day? Amen. Well, tonight the challenge is to be like Jesus in this way. And so if you've fallen short of that, or if you want help in being more like Christ, we can always help you. We're happy to help you in a number of different ways. Or if you need to become a Christian, if you haven't taken on his name, if you haven't taken the name of Jesus on and put him on in baptism, it doesn't matter if you're acting like Jesus. You're not clothed in Christ. Your name isn't Joseph Christ yet. You know what I'm saying? You haven't taken his name. And so if you need to do that, have your sins washed away, we can help you learn more about that and make that happen. Whatever you need this evening, come while we stand and sing and we'll help you.